Hello and welcome to the Middle East Report. In this edition of the Middle East Report, we will be looking at Egypt. We'll be looking at the revolution that in January swept the former Egyptian President Mubarak from power, known as the Arab Spring. We'll be looking at the new interim government and its transition to multi-party elections that are scheduled for this autumn to discuss what the nature of this new government will be. Will Islamic extremism and the Muslim Brotherhood take hold of Egypt, or will the forces of liberty and democracy prevail? And are we beginning to witness a new Middle East? So discuss all these vital issues regarding Egypt. It's a real privilege and honour for me today to be joined by Tareq, who is a leading Egyptian political thinker and writer. Tareq, hello and welcome to the programme.
Delighted to be here.
I can't tell you what a great honour it is for us to have you on Revelation TV today.
It is my pleasure.
To talk about this, such an important issue to do with the Middle East and to do with Egypt. Tareq, can you tell our viewers something about yourself, a little bit about your background and how you became one of the leading lights, not only in Egypt, but also in the Arab world for truth and also for liberty?
My life could be divided into three parts: an academic part, corporate and business part, and then again academia. I taught at many universities from 1971 to 79, and I started writing during this era, and my first book was published in Morocco in 1978. And then I joined Shell International Petroleum. I learned a lot from my Shell years. I was lucky to be chosen as Chief Executive Officer for Shell companies in the Middle East region, and I did that for 10 years until 1996, when I returned back to academia, and I returned as a totally different person after my 20 years in an international corporate as great as Shell International. So I'm a product of the two sides, the academia and the corporate, the very sophisticated corporate culture of a company that goes back to the 19th century. I wrote 17 books in Arabic, and I have one book in Italian. I didn't translate it into Italian, somebody did that. And I have also a book translated by a very great French scholar into French. And I do have my books in English, 6 books, that they were all published here in London, but also distributed quite vastly in North America. My main focus is on the Arab mind. How can the Arab mind join peacefully and positively the march of progress and modernity? And there is a lot to be said about this and about the obstacles on the way towards this target.
What led you to take up? It really is a brave campaign, really. If you think about the Middle East, and it's very much controlled by despots, authoritarian regimes. There's a suppression of freedom of speech and freedom of assembly. What led you really to take this campaign to challenge the powers that be and to be a real force for democracy and freedom, not only in Egypt but throughout the Arab world?
It's a very important question. The answer is my love to Egypt as a civil society before 1952. I love this era of the Egyptian history. Egypt from 1805 until 1952 considered itself part of the Mediterranean. It belonged to the old Greco-Roman civilization and fell in love with Europe and with French literature in particular. This Egypt is my dream. I dream of seeing Egypt once again as a Mediterranean product. It is the fruit of the Mediterranean. And this is not an exaggeration, because we are the product of geography, all of us. So from the geographic standpoint, we are a product of this part of the Mediterranean opposite Greece. And history tells us that our culture has been always related to our geographic location. But we have been kidnapped by other schools of thinking, by people who say we are only Arabs. No, we are Arabs, but not fully. We speak Arabic. our cultural life is dominated by the language. No problem with that. And then another kidnapper says, we are only Muslims. And no, we are Muslims, but not fully as well. We are African, but not fully. What is in full is our identity as a product of the Mediterranean. This what I dream of seeing Egypt as a Mediterranean country with a Mediterranean culture, and I think it's doable. If it was done by Muhammad Ali 200 years ago after the French expedition, it should be possible to be repeated.
And Egypt is considered the leader of the Arab world. Can you explain something about Egypt's recent history, particularly after the end of British rule and the establishment, really, of the Egyptian monarchy?
The most important landmark in Egypt modern history is Muhammad Ali. Muhammad Ali came to Egypt in 1805, and we were very similar to other Arabic-speaking countries. He made our campus towards northwest. He sent hundreds and thousands of Egyptians to be educated in Italy and France. And we introduced the first Code Napoleon in the Middle East in 1882. So we had a legal system that was produced by Napoleon, and we had a lot of translations. We had lots of translations from ancient Greek literature, ancient Greek philosophy, European literature. Actually, my generation read most of the Russian literature, the English literature, the Italian literature, the Spanish, things like Cervantes. We read all of this in Arabic because of the generations produced by Muhammad Ali dream. The Muhammad Ali dream made Egypt and Egyptians to believe in the Western civilization, in the Greek-Roman civilization, and made us to believe that we are a product of the Mediterranean, as I said earlier. And this was the main landmark in our history. And then monarchy came to an end in 1952, and we had a leader that had a great dream. Nasser had a great dream, but I claim that he didn't fulfill most of his dream. He wanted to enlarge the middle class. He enlarged the middle class from a quantity, not quality standpoint. He wanted to enlarge the education. He did enlarge the education, but also jeopardized the quality of the education. But I think the biggest mistake that he wanted Egypt to forget that it is Egyptian. He wanted Egypt to remember only that it is an Arab country. And it is not doable. You can't be against the geographic determinism, if I may say this in English. And we are the product of our location. We should not challenge that. So since 1952, we changed the campus a bit from northwest to northeast. And then came Sadat with his great visionary leadership style, and he wanted to return Egypt again to what Egypt used to be since Muhammad Ali. He actually was a very visionary person. He saw the collapse of the Cold War era before it happened, nearly 20 years before it took place. He also changed the whole way we looked into the Israeli-Arab conflict from a military conflict to a political and cultural conflict that should be sorted out by negotiations. Today, Egypt has to make its choice. Is it only an Islamic country? Is it only an Arab country? Is it only an African country? Or it is all of this together, and we will have all of these facets living and coexisting together. I hope I can contribute to reaching such a destination.
I'm sure we will. We've got a quick clip to go to now that looks at the modern history of Egypt.
The British occupation to follow would be bittersweet. They would both help and harm the Egyptian way of life. Some public works, such as the Aswan Dam, would be completed, which controlled flooding and aided in crop irrigation. Yet many Egyptians lost government jobs, and they were forced to pay high taxes. They occupied Egypt for many years until Great Britain, amid protests and uprisings, was forced to declare Egypt's independence in 1922. Yet there remained a complicated influence of power over the Egyptian monarchy by the British until a military coup ousted the monarchy in 1953 and Mohammed Nahib became Egypt's first president. Egypt became completely independent of Great Britain in 1956 under President Gamal Abdel Nasser as the Suez Canal was nationalized. It was under the third president, Anwar Sadat, that Egypt would first have relations with the United States. In the 1970s, the U.S. was still in a Cold War with the USSR. In 1972, Sadat had taken the side of the U.S. and expelled all Soviet advisors from Egypt. The next year, Egypt was at war again with Israel over the Sinai Peninsula. Israel had taken it in the 6 Days War in 1967. Egypt was now trying to regain it. Both the U.S. and the USSR intervened. The U.S. would convince Egypt to cease fighting. In turn, a peace agreement was reached by all parties, returning the peninsula to Egypt and a temporary peace to the Middle East. Since 1953, Egypt has been ruled as a democratic republic, yet many contend it is a democracy only in name. The current president, Hosni Mubarak, has been president since 1981, often running in elections unopposed. There are opposition groups now who have more freedom than ever before to protest hereditary and selective succession of power. Two of these groups are the Tomorrow Party and the Egyptian Movement for Change. Many people on the street, both Muslim and Christian, conservative and liberal, feel that change toward a more democratically elected leader is inevitable.
Thank you. Welcome back to the Middle East Report. Tareq, there we got a brief historic overview of Egypt, but really going back to the time of President Nasser, who was leader of the Free Officers Movement, who really took power against a very effective coup against the King Farouk of Egypt in 1952. But Nasser was pretty much known as the leader in the Arab world, but also very much known for the Suez Crisis in 1956, in which Egypt went to war with Israel, Britain and France that ended up in a complete fiasco. And then we also, his legacy also be remembered for the loss in the 6-Day War in 1967. What legacy did Nasser leave Egypt and the people of Egypt?
Nasser is very popular in Egypt, and I think that people can tend to forget the major mistakes. You refer to some of them, like 56, because 56 you described it as fiasco, but it was a military defeat. Sinai was fully lost, and the Israelis occupied Sinai over a few days. This was repeated in 67. But people tend to forget this to Nasser because of his focus on social justice. He was very much focusing on social justice. He was a defender of the lower middle class and the very poor Egyptians, the have-not. But did he serve them? I'm not sure of that. I think he heard them while he was trying to help them. His intention was to help the have-not of Egypt. But at the end, he didn't help them. On the contrary, he forced them to go down in the social strata. He forced them to immigrate in Arab countries, and some of these Arab countries are extremely backward from the value system viewpoint, and Egypt is suffering from many things, and one of the things we suffer from is the impact of the immigration to the Arab Peninsula. People went to a very backward culture and came back with lots of the culture components of this area. It doesn't help Egypt to have Egyptians coming back from Saudi Arabia. They come back with dollars, but they also come back with very rotten value system. And Nasser, at the end, created a dream that has never been fulfilled. And the dream itself was noble. Expand the middle class, make education accessible and available to all Egyptians. But this was not fulfilled. But what remained and is the reason why many Egyptians love Nasser, that he was with the poor. He sided with the have-not, not like Mubarak, that who blindly sided with the millionaires and billionaires of Egypt. And from this standpoint, Nasser will be always remembered by the poor Egyptians, and Mubarak will come in history with lots of disgrace.
And looking on to his successor, Anwar Sadat, who has become known as a man of peace, a visionary who made a historic break with the past. We saw on the historic clip before that he broke the Russian hold on Egypt and then looked toward the United States. He was also the first Arab leader to address the Israeli parliament, the Knesset,
Absolutely.
in his search for peace. And then we had the famous Camp David peace accords with Israel and Egypt from 1979, which wanted to build a genuine peace between the two nations. Why do we see very few men of vision and peace in the Middle East? Like Sadat?
It is not easy to have people like Anwar Sadat. Anwar Sadat was ahead of his time. He, as I mentioned earlier, saw the end of the Cold War era 20 years beforehand. You don't have many people like this in the world today, even in America, even in Europe. You don't have many Churchills, you don't have many de Gaulles. And I believe that it is very unfortunate that Sadat was killed in 1981. If Sadat remained in power, he would have took Egypt to much better horizons. Sadat saw the end of the Cold War and acted accordingly. His policy was based on the fact that the Soviet Union will die sooner or later, so don't go on after the Soviet Union. But as Sadat was great in many respects, he had also, he's a human being, he had also his shortfalls and mistakes. One of them is when he came to power in 1970, he thought that he can only create an equilibrium against the men of Nasser, the left, by having the support of the Islamists. And this was a great mistake. America made the same mistake in Afghanistan. In order to knock down the Soviet Union, Americans believed that the enemy of my enemy is my friend. So they agreed with the Saudis to go together and fight the Soviet troops in Afghanistan. The end result was Al-Qaeda. Al-Qaeda was created under these conditions. Al-Qaeda was created in Afghanistan while the Saudis and the Americans joined hands against the Soviet troops. So Sadat actually made the mistake of the Cold War, which is, if the Islamists are against communism, let us join them and let them be in our boat. At the end result, we today have a major problem with Islamism, and this problem is one of the products or the yields of the Cold War era. And I believe, as Sadat was great in certain respects, he made a mistake and he paid the price of this mistake. He was killed by the people that he thought they will create for him the equilibrium against the leftist and the communist Egyptians.
Okay, we have a short clip to go to that is in memory of Anwar Sadat.
Sinai, on the banks of the Suez Canal, blind troops battle heroically against immeasurably superior enemy forces.
כן, גבירותיי ורבותיי, הטלוויזיה הישראלית מעריכה כי תוצאות הבחירות לכנסת התשיעית יהיו כדלקמן. נחל ניצחה בבחירות וקיבלה 44 מנדטים.
לפנות בוקר מגיע המנצח. עבור מנחם בגין זהו ניצחון גדול.
לפנות לנשיא סאדאת, לנשיא אסד ולמלך חוסיין בהצעה לפתוח במשא ומתן למען חתימת חוזי שלום ביניהם ובין מדינת ישראל.
Enable us to end all the old heritage bitterness, the sufferings for our people in the area.
I, for my part, will of course be ready to come to your capital, Cairo, for the same purpose. No more wars, peace, real peace, and forever. With all my heart, Shalom.
באתי עליכם היום כדי שיחדיו נבנה חיים חדשים, כדי לקיים את השלום.
למדנו מן ההיסטוריה, אדוני הנשיא, כי המלחמה היא נמנעת, השלום הוא בלתי נמנע.
While the delegations held many meetings at the lower level, Mr. Carter took charge at the top, beginning an intense series of meetings with the two leaders separately, and after 12 days of blackout, the compromises are now known.
Let us pledge to make the spirit of Camp David a new chapter in the history of our nation.
The Jewish people suffered much, and therefore peace to us is a striving coming innermost from our heart and soul.
אני מביא לכנסת את בשורת השכנת השלום.
פולשים המפריעים שנשלח מלחמת השילוב, אני מבקש אותך לשתוק. אני מבקשת להגן על ארץ ישראל מפני ראש הממשלה.
Of the Nobel Peace Prize for 1978. Menachem Begin.
Peace is the beauty of life. It is sunshine. It is the advancement of man. Peace is all of these, and more, and more.
The President of the Arab Republic of Egypt and the Prime Minister of Israel.
No more war, no more bloodshed, no more bereavement. Peace unto you. Shalom, salam forever.
ב-6 באוקטובר 1981, הנשיא אנואר סאדאת סוקר את יחידות הצבא ולפתע מזנקים אנשים חמושים ופותחים אש לעברו. הנשיא סאדאת נרצח. בקהיר בגין חוזר ואומר כי הסכם קמפ דיוויד לא יופר בגלל מותו הטרגי של הנשיא המצרי. השלום איננו עניין שבין אנשים למנהיגים, אלא בין שתי הארצות, ישראל ומצרים.
אור ראשון החלו הדחפורים הורסים את בתי שכונת האיקסי. המגמה ליישר את ימית ולחסותה בחול, כשם שעשו לשאר יישובי החבל.
Okay. Welcome back to the Middle East Report now. That clip was in tribute to the former president of Egypt, Anwar Sadat, and Michin Begin of Israel, how the Middle East needs brave and courageous leaders like these men. We're going on now, looking at former President Mubarak, Tareq. He would have marked 30 years in power this year, and he used the emergency laws after the assassination of Sadat in 81 to consolidate his hold on power. How is he able to hold on for power so long and yet deny political freedom and liberty to his people?
Let me first say that I personally considered Mubarak, since he took over in October 1981, as the blackest file in our history. We got a president with zero experience, zero political formation, and close to zero educationally and culturally. He was a very basic Air Force officer. We don't know the background of the selection of Hosni Mubarak as vice president. Not much revealed on this very important point. Why did Anwar Sadat select him as vice president? The man was very limited. They taught him, they tried to teach him everything from 76 to 81. They were even teaching him Arabic language. So we got a very basic Air Force officer to be the successor of a very visionary leader, Anwar Sadat. The man who was very limited politically was also ready to be corrupt. From the first day onwards, he had commissions with regard to weapons, arms deals, and with the two factors, ignorance and corruption, he was probably the worst in our history, the worst ruler in our history. He ruled us as a farm, jointly with his wife and two sons, who were equally corrupt. How did he manage? Just remember the following. When he came to power in 1981, the people on the payroll of the Security Department or Ministry of Interior was 125,000 people. When he stepped down in February, or when he was kicked out in February, the number of people on the payroll of the Ministry of Interior was 1.5 million. And this is the tool he used. He did not use the army to rule. He used the police. Imagine a country like Egypt that goes from 100,000 people as security forces to 1.5 million. He didn't trust the army, and I think he was right in not trusting the army. Why? Because when you look into what's going on in the Middle East, two armies refused to shoot at their people, the Tunisian and the Egyptian.
Yes.
But three armies accepted to kill their own people, Libya, Yemen, and Syria. What is the difference? That our army and in Tunisia, they were national armies. But the Libyan army, the Yemeni army, and the Syrian army are armies that are managed by the family of each president. I mean, the sons of Gaddafi are running the army. The sons of the president of Yemen are running the army. And in Syria, it's further complicated. It is completely a family affair and a sect affair as well. The Alawite Shia sect are, and the family ruling the army. So the two national armies refused to shoot at people. The Egyptian army was not the tool of Hosni Mubarak. He didn't trust the army. He trusted the police that tortured people, that killed people, that made us live in a very undignified environment. Actually, many people here in the West talk about it as economically driven revolution. I totally refuse this. The main slogan was dignity and pride. People were seeking dignity. People felt very indignified under Mubarak. And actually, I used to find it very shameful that a great country like Egypt, a country that produced actually many Voltaires, to be ruled by a totally ignorant and corrupt president who made us to be like some African corrupt countries. We were ahead of countries like Nigeria and some other countries that are known of being based on corruption. And I think the main tool that he used to stay in power for 3 decades was the police. It was a police state. He ran Egypt with a very thick stick.
We did witness those incredible and historic scenes back in, I think, January the 25th of this year, when thousands of ordinary Egyptians took to the streets, camped out in Tahrir Square in the centre of Cairo in defiance of the regime. In your opinion, what were the factors that led so many ordinary Egyptians to take to the streets?
Two factors in my views. What happened in the parliamentary elections at the end of 2010, when usually they used to falsify the elections, but not to the extent of having 98% of the seats of the parliament, as it happened in the October elections, parliamentary elections. This formed and created a case of blockage that made it very clear to people. If Mubarak takes for his men 98% of the seats, it means that the street is the outlet. We have no other outlet. He occupied the parliament, and he left us with one option: go to the street. And this is classical case in political science. When you create a blockage, this leads to an explosion. And the blockage was created during the fourth quarter of 2010, and the explosion came first quarter 2011. Another equally important factor was his insistence to be succeeded by his son. This was very humiliated. Egypt cannot be inherited by the son of a military officer. Egypt cannot be taken over. If it was a monarchy, I would have respected that. I have no problem with that. Yes. But it is not a monarchy, it's a republic. And it's a republican system that should not have been very busy with this succession dream. Mrs. Mubarak, Hosni Mubarak, the two sons of Mubarak, the entire ruling junta of Hosni Mubarak had one mission in the past 10 years, the past decade, to work hard on making Hosni Mubarak succeeded by his son. This made Egyptians and made the army to feel very humiliated. Egypt cannot be taken over like North Korea, like Zaire, by the son of the president. It is too much of a humiliation, too much of an insult. So what happened that these two factors, the elections, the farce of the 2010 election, and which was a black tragedy, and the Gamal Mubarak syndrome that led people to the street, driven by their quest for pride and dignity more than butter and bread. It doesn't mean that there is no poverty in Egypt. There is a lot of poverty in Egypt, but the revolution did not come from the Islamist side. It did also come from the slums around Cairo. It came from the middle class, sons and daughters of middle class, well-educated, use computers, use Facebook, use Twitter, and know the world through technology. So it was, I think, in one word, dignity-driven.
Okay, we have a short clip then that brings back those historic moments back in January of this year, 2011, when ordinary Egyptians took to the streets of Cairo in defiance of President Mubarak's regime.
A significant core of Egyptian pro-democracy protesters are maintaining pressure on Egypt's president in the centre of Cairo, a day after hundreds of thousands filled Tahrir Square in one of the biggest public displays of discontent with Hosni Mubarak. There's talk they might head for the presidential palace on Friday. The army has stationed a large column of tanks and mechanised infantry vehicles en route. More demonstrators piled on the pressure outside the Prime Minister's office. They set up camp outside the parliament buildings in Cairo as well, and there are signs the already widespread demonstrations are spreading still further. 400 kilometres south of the capital, at least 3 protesters are reported to have been shot dead when police fired live rounds on a crowd of around 3,000. The protests are now in their 3rd week, and none of Mubarak's measures has done anything to appease his detractors on the street. Russia's envoy to the Middle East urged a solution through legitimate procedures, adding that Russia is with the Egyptian people.
Welcome back to the Middle East Report. Tareq, you were an eyewitness to these historic events. What was it like to be in Tahrir Square with the demonstrators protesting against the regime, but more importantly, wanting to see a new democratic, free Egypt?
It was amazing. I went to Tahrir Square during the very hot days more than once, and I was very positively inspired. I never saw 2 million people in one place in Egypt. Actually, many of my colleagues who were against Hosni Mubarak failed 5 years ago only to gather 1,000 people. So to go from a failure in getting 1,000 people in a demonstration to 2 million people in Tahrir Square and 12 million people all over the country on every day, this was a miracle. When I went to Tahrir Square for the first time, I expected the square to be in a case of chaos, a mess, dirty, and it was the opposite of all of that. People were entering the Tahrir Square through check-in points. Very organized process, queues. And then when I entered the square for the first time, I was amazed that the place was as clean as a street in Paris or in London. And this was my second surprise. My third surprise, that people were very friendly to each other, and the morale was extremely high. You cannot explain it in words. The morale was extremely high. Even the old stuff of people harassing girls when they are dressed in a modern way never happened in Tahrir Square. There was no single incident of harassment for any girl. There were boys and girls in a very positive atmosphere, in a very clean. Imagine 2 million people in Cairo. Without demonstrations, Cairo is not a clean place. It's very crowded, it's very noisy, it's very dusty. But it was an amazing. I left when I went there first time with a very high soul. I couldn't believe that Egyptians will queue for half an hour, 45 minutes to enter a place in a very organized queuing system. And then they will remain very friendly inside. And there was a great sense of humor. Egypt is known of sense of humor. There was a great sense of humor in the Tahrir Square. I think this spirit is one of the factors that make me optimistic, that Egypt will not go down the drain, will not make the wrong choices. And there are many choices today, but it is for the first time Egyptians are free to make a choice. They never had this. When people say to me today in Egypt, we don't know the future, I said, this is very good. Nobody knows the future. You make the future. You don't know it. In the past, you used to know the future. You used to know that at the end of 2011, there will be a referendum or election, and Mubarak will win 95% of the votes, and he will form a new cabinet, and he will select the prime minister without consulting any of us. We don't know things that way, but we should not know them that way. We should contribute to the making of the future. And I don't believe when somebody says to me, what do you think the future would be? I say there is nothing as such. If we make our homework, if we, the ones who believe in a civil society, in modern Egypt, in multiple culture and diversity, religiously and culturally, if we do our homework, we will have a very good Egypt. If we don't, and if we continue with negativity and apathy, we might end up as an Islamic Republic. And in this case, we should not blame Israel or America. We should not blame the West. We should blame ourselves that we didn't work hard for a modern Egypt.
Yeah. Well, which leads me on. At the moment, we've got an interim military government in power, haven't we, until the autumn, where for the first time in Egypt, multi-party elections for the parliament and also presidential elections are due to take place. But many Western leaders and also Middle Eastern analysts have expressed fears that in this up-and-coming elections that the Muslim Brotherhood could actually take hold and win the parliamentary elections, even the presidential elections. What is your assessment of this situation?
I don't like to underestimate the popularity, the role, the effect, and the influence of the Islamist. It is significant, and one cannot deny it. But I don't also exaggerate. I think if the Copts of Egypt, if all the Christians of Egypt, if all the liberal men and women of Egypt, if also the Sufis of Egypt get together, act, go to the ballot box and participate in the process, I think we will have what happened in the universities a few days ago when the Islamists failed to get more than 25% of the votes. So there were elections that people don't know much about in the student unions, in all universities. And this is actually used to be the castle of the Islamists. They got 1/4 of the votes. So if we do act positively, if we get our act together, if we warn people about what are the consequences of falling in the hands of the Muslim brothers, we will keep them as a minority. They might continue to exist as a 20-30% party, but they should not be allowed. But when I say they should not be allowed, I don't mean that they should be banned. They should not be democratically allowed to get more than 20-25%.
And also looking at some of the other concerns, it's since the fall of Mubarak's regime, the Israelis have become very nervous about change in Egypt, especially in light of the military administration, for example, allowing Iranian warships through the Suez Canal for the first time, and also that the Iranians have sent submarines to the Red Sea. In your opinion, will the Egyptian-Israeli peace agreement hold?
First, I believe that Egypt will continue to hold Iran as a strategic enemy. It's a threat to us. And I add to this, Saudi Arabia is equally a threat to us. One of them is the spearhead of radical Sunni Islam, and the other one is the spearhead of the Shiite radical Islam. I think personally that these will continue to be our strategic enemies. So I'm not that scared of relationship with Iran, that we fall in love with Iran, we go to bed with Iran. It will not happen, because Iran's role is against Egypt's role in the Middle East. And any ruler of Egypt will not let this happen. Iran as an Islamist republic will continue to be our strategic enemy. I also believe that the army will never go back to what it used to be, of a silent backup to the president. It will be closer to the army, the post-Kemal Ataturk army in Turkey, an army that will safeguard the constitution. It was safeguarding the president, and now I believe the army will continue to safeguard the state, Egypt, the constitution. And I'm one of those who would like to see a new constitution worked out before the two elections you refer to. You refer to the parliamentary election and the presidential election. I would go for the following: to work out a new constitution so we know the rules of the game first, and then we have a parliamentary elections and we have a president. If we go this way, we will not have the Islamists holding more than 20% of the votes. If we go as it might go, parliamentary elections first, they might go high to 30-35%, and this is frightening to Christians, frightening more to modern women and liberal Egyptians as myself. But I don't think that Egypt will have an Islamist prime minister or a president, and I think I would like people to think, to remember what was always said during the last years of Franco in Spain. People used to say, once the general dies, we will fall as a country, Spain, in the hands of the communists. It didn't happen. The communists took like 30% and continued to deteriorate from 30 to 20 to 10 to 5%, because the reason the communists were an alternative has vanished. And I believe that the Islamists did continue to have this popularity because Mubarak was there. They were the opposite of Mubarak. Today, they are a player among other players. But again, I don't want to underestimate their danger. I would continue to ask the Christians of Egypt, the free women of Egypt, the liberal Egyptians, those who dream of Egypt as a modern state, to be positive, to participate, and make it impossible for the Islamists to rule a great country such as Egypt.
And what was the future for relations between Egypt and Israel as really the anchor of stability against the forces of darkness in the Middle East and forces of extremism?
Yeah, the picture today is totally different than the picture shown in the documentary for Sadat in 79 and 80. We have new, very dangerous players: Syria, Hezbollah, Iran, and the Muslim Brothers. So if we talk regionally, the picture is very complicated. If we talk only Egypt/Israel, I believe that the Egyptian army will always ban any deterioration to the relationship or a possibility of canceling Camp David. I heard from many leaders of the army that this will take Egypt 100 years backward. Egypt doesn't want, shouldn't want to have a war at all with Israel or with others. Egypt needs to focus on its economy, education, building a modern and solid and welfare middle class, and a war will take Egypt backward for a century. And the army knows that very well. So I'm not worried about that. I'm worried about if the Islamists become very influential in Egypt, they will raise the hatred towards others, and on top of others come the Jews.
You wrote an excellent article, which I enjoyed reading, entitled Egypt, If I Were Coptic, referring to the ancient Christian community in Egypt. In your opinion, what can be done to protect the Coptic community as they face almost daily persecution, oppression and discrimination from the former regime? And even now, post the revolution, we're seeing churches being bombed and Christians being attacked and Christian girls being kidnapped. What can be done to secure their safety, and also a way that the Christian community can play a large part in Egyptian society?
The Copts are the Egyptian Christian Orthodox, are about 12 million people. So it's a significant Egyptian group. They are the original Egyptians. The word Egypt, Egypt, and the word Copt are very similar words to each other, and it actually means the land of the Copts. Yeah, when you pronounce the name of Egypt in German, you say Egypt, and this is the old pronunciation of Kept, Gopt, Gept in Greek. Yeah, so I believe that there is no solution for the Christians of Egypt. There is a solution for Egyptians with more of a civil society, modern state, modern legal system. There will be a good place for the Christians. If Egypt goes radical, they will suffer, but they will not be the only suffering ones. Christians will suffer, women will suffer, liberal Egyptians will suffer. So the solution is national solution. We can't carve a solution for the Christians in Egypt. We can't have a mechanism of safeguarding the Christians. We can safeguard the citizens of Egypt. And I'm very glad that the Christians of Egypt started to get a little bit away from the church. They used to demonstrate mainly inside churches. Now they demonstrate with other non-Christians in the main squares and the streets. It's a sign that they behave as Egyptian more than as Copts. I am also optimistic that pluralistic Egypt is not an impossible dream.
And we're down to almost about the last 5 minutes of the programme. It's just gone fast. It's gone fast so quickly. Tareq, can you tell us, what do you see the future for Egypt and Egypt's role in the Middle East?
I always remind people that when Muhammad Ali made Egypt and the Egyptians fond of the Western civilization, and when he sent many Egyptians for education in Europe, the entire Middle East looked towards Europe. When Nasser raised the slogans of socialism and pan-Arabism, they spread these slogans from Kuwait to Morocco. When Sadat said, let us talk to our historic enemy, people rejected that at the beginning, and they are all trying to do this, including Syria. Syria did negotiate more than once via the Americans and via the Turks with the Israelis. So the impact of Egypt on the region is undeniable. Why? Because it is the key cultural player. I mean, the art is produced by Egyptian, the media, the books, the education. For many reasons, Egypt represents, as I heard yesterday from one of the members of the House of Lords, the population of Egypt is 300 million. I said, what do you mean? He said, because of its impact on the Arab countries, it represents the 300 million. If it does well, the 300 million do well. If it does not do well, the 300 million go down the drain. So I believe that there is a historic chance for Egypt and for Egyptians together, act together and move towards modernity and make all what is possible to modernize Egypt. If this happens, there will be a very good Middle East. It will be good news to the external world. It will be good news to the West. It will be good news to Christians all over the world and will be good news to Israel. If Egypt goes down the drain, it will be bad news to all of these parties.
So interesting. Now a bit close to home. What's your? You say in an article that the West is beginning to finally wake up to the Islamist threat posed to Europe and the States. How can the West defeat this threat and ensure the sense of freedom and liberty we've enjoyed in Britain for centuries?
Yesterday I was speaking at one of the prominent British think tanks, and I said that the West is not free of defects. The Western civilization was a great step towards modernity and progress, but it is not free of mistakes. I talked yesterday about the weakness of the Western civilization before interest and money. And I said, could you explain to me what makes America looks like a deaf America before the Saudi treatment to women? I mean, America is fully aware of the tragic situation of women in Saudi Arabia. Have we ever heard America noise about the tragedy of being a woman in Saudi Arabia? None. We all know that Saudi Arabia goes and builds hundreds of mosques everywhere in the world, from California to Tokyo. And then, have we ever heard an American call to build a church, single church in Saudi Arabia? There is no single church in Saudi Arabia. Let aside a synagogue, because this will be a farce to talk to the Saudis about a synagogue. So what makes America as a superpower, as a leader of the free world, do this? It is interest, it's money. And if the West defends its value system as it defends its interest, we will surpass this agony.
Tareq Hegi, it's been an absolute pleasure for you to join us today on the Middle East Report, and thank you for giving us your insight into the situation that Egypt's facing. I think many of us need to start praying for Egypt, praying that the forces of freedom will advance in that country and that the Christian community there can be protected, and that the peace treaty with Israel and Egypt can be preserved in order to bring about stability and modernity to the Middle East. So it's been a pleasure to have you on today, and our prayers and thoughts are very much with you. And thank you for your bravery and thank you for your courage.
The pleasure was entirely mine. Thank you very much.
Just want to thank you very much for watching today's Middle East Report. There we covered the whole issue of Egypt and how important Egypt is to the Middle East. And we're going out with a song now that pays a tribute to the bravery and the courage of so many ordinary Egyptians who defied Mubarak's regime in calls for their freedom and democracy in the region.
Whether you're a Christian, whether you're a Muslim, whether you're an atheist, you will demand your goddamn rights, and we will have our rights, one way or the other. We will never be silent. From one extreme to another, from the summer to the spring.
hands into the fire. Come on,